The USS Bennington, 1944 to 1970. Farewell to a gallant lady. Her keel was laid in 1942. She grew in size for all to view. Her crew and training was growing strong, for we, her crew, were to belong to a fighting ship, and we must be strong to fight our enemy on the seas and bring them to their very knees. We helped win battles and fought our foes. We gave no quarter, as the saying goes. Well, our ship is 50, and what can we say? Both the lady and the crew have had our day. So shipmates rise and turn to the west, and the bugler sounds taps as the Bennington is laid to rest. Charlie Idle.
Happened a couple of weeks ago when we accepted an invitation from Resource Recovery International, the salvage firm, to see the final resting place for the ship and how its materials would be welcomed by an exploding economy in India. Now, many of you have asked to see a recap of our special segments about the trip, so we decided to spend some time reviewing our Passage to India series this weekend. What we discovered on the trip could be the start of a whole new industry and open the economic doors between the Olympic Peninsula and those rapidly developing markets in India. March 1st, the Essex-class carrier finished a 3-month journey that makes it the first major naval warship to ever be sold for scrapping overseas. When the Bennington arrived in Port Angeles last fall, it culminated an effort of nearly 2 years to clear the way for the ship to be cut apart and sold for salvage. Officials with New York-based Resource Recovery International said it was economically viable to sell the metals from the ship, using their plan to start the work here in Port Angeles and finish it in India, where more than 40 rolling mills are anxiously looking for metals to be recycled into new products. The Port of Port Angeles was in favor of the idea because it would bring a ship to pay fees at empty dock space and provide local jobs. For 3 months after the ship was docked, dozens of workers trooped aboard every day to cut apart the superstructure and demilitarize the Essex-class carrier by destroying all weapons systems and sensitive equipment. The remains were then dropped into the hull, and by early December, the vessel was ready for its overseas journey. The only hitch in the 3-month trip was when the huge ocean-going tug was diverted to provide emergency aid to a burning freighter in the Gulf of Alaska.
Yeah, it was a long journey, yeah, and we did hire the Smith tug, and then, you know, like, we had some problems with Smith Singapore because she had to rescue Seattle, Hyundai Seattle, and we had to change over to a Chinese tug, but it was, you know, as good as Smith Singapore, and it's a good job they've done, yeah.
But the main thing was that the Bennington towed real well, didn't run any storms, any problems?
No, she was very well prepared because when she sailed from America, she was very well made seaworthy, yeah. She was sealed properly and she was, you know, taking good care of it. And luckily, she didn't hit any bad weather, except a few days in Hawaii, yeah, last time. Otherwise, she did very well.
The big day for the Bennington's arrival, or beaching, came last Wednesday morning at Along, India, a ship's graveyard northwest of Bombay outside the bustling rural city of Bhavnagar. It's an amazing place where shipbreakers can tear apart more than 100 ships at a time, beaching them and cutting the vessels apart for their metals and various components. There's everything from tankers and freighters to offshore oil rigs. But the arrival of the Bennington was something entirely new, and even though the high tide hit at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a crowd on hand to catch the event. That included most of the shipbreakers, company leaders from RRI and Cross Seas Limited, which had purchased the ship, and a curious group of shipyard workers and local residents. In typical Indian fashion, the beaching was even accompanied by tea and coffee service, as everyone watched and waited to see if the big carrier could be brought close to shore. Other ships brought here don't have the deep draft of the Bennington, and the operation was a delicate one that took several hours. But as the sun came up, we saw that the ship had been brought close enough for the breakers to move into action. What's left of the Bennington will be pulled even closer to the beach using huge chains and other equipment. For officials from RRI and Cross Seas, the arrival of the Bennington was a major accomplishment. In fact, RRI is already working on plans to bring another carrier and other naval ships to India for salvage later this year.
Yeah, really, I mean, after the beaching, I was really excited. But just before, when it was being beached, yeah, it was really, I mean, you know, we had a lot of tensions. I mean, you could see from our faces probably. And we had 10 people probably on board the Bennington, and we had 2 tugs. So we did all our best to try to beach her, and you know, after she was beached, and we had to wait for the sunlight to come to sea, yeah, and then we were really confident, and it was really a good beaching, more than what we expected. Yeah.
And this offered some new challenges, didn't it? Because it was a large vessel. You've had big ones there before, but there was some different things.
Oh yeah, no doubt it was a big challenge, yeah, because it was the largest vessel, tow vessel, which has come in with such a big high draft, yeah.
When a ship like the former aircraft carrier USS Bennington is sent to India for breaking or salvage, it could mean hundreds of jobs, not just for cutting apart the ships, but recycling the metal and other parts into dozens of new uses. When NCN photographer Mary Ruprecht and I accepted the invitation from New York-based Resource Recovery International to visit India last week, we knew we'd get a chance to see the old Bennington arrive at its last destination, completing a 3-month journey from Port Angeles, where salvage operations had first started. But we also hoped to find out more about the ultimate uses for the materials to be taken from the carrier, and we were not to be disappointed. Just outside Bhavnagar, India, and a few miles away from the shipbreaking yards at Along, we were taken to see one of the many steel rolling mills that are scattered around the country. In all, there are more than 40 of these mills in India, with more being constructed every year to recycle metals and provide materials for a rapidly growing economy. This particular mill handles more than 45 tons per day, with the steel from the ship ready for recycling the same day that it's cut from the ships at Along. 8 different breaking units feed material to the mill at the same time. Once the steel plating arrives at the mill, workers sort it into various thicknesses for processing. Up to 100 workers employed on 2 10-hour shifts per day sort the metals and slice it into specific sizes to meet the customer's orders. From there, the steel strips are fed into an oil-fired furnace, which heats the metal up to 2,000 degrees so it can be fed through the machinery and formed into new rebar. From there, the rebar is loaded onto trucks by workers and shipped to building sites all over the country. One of the final parts of this process at the rolling mill is to turn out the rebar according to whatever the order specifications might be. That might be for a different strength design, it might be for different sizes. You can see the workers now as they load the truck and move this rebar out. It'll go all over India to be used in various types of building projects. While the mill doesn't have the same environmental standards we would see in the United States, efforts are being made. Water used for cooling the steel is recycled, and the iron dust left behind from the process is gathered and shipped to Japan, where it commands a price of $50 per ton as reinforcing material for steel in the construction of new ships. Across the street, we found another busy operation providing more employment connected with the ship breaking on the Bennington and other vessels at Along. This oxygen plant is used to reload the bottles shipbreakers use for the hundreds of cutting torches at Along. Air is taken into the plant through a pump and then separated into nitrogen and liquid oxygen. From there, the oxygen is bottled and loaded onto trucks for the return trip to the shipyards. This is a very labor-intensive operation and is expected to be even busier with the Bennington. A shipbreaker can use up to 200 bottles of oxygen a day, but it could take 1,000 bottles a day for cutting work on the more solidly built Navy ship, and that means more jobs and more of an economic impact. When the former aircraft carrier Bennington pulled into the shipbreaking yards at Along, India, it marked the end of an 18-month effort by Resource Recovery of New York to get clearance for the big salvage project. But there's hope in India that the Bennington is just the first of many U.S. Navy vessels to make the trip. The arrival of the Bennington came with a good deal of anticipation at Along, a small area about 2 hours northwest of Bombay. Not only was this solidly constructed Navy vessel a source of more non-ferrous metal than the other ships usually brought here for breaking, but it marked a first-time experiment to see if such a large vessel could be brought in close to the beach. As we told you before, the beaching went well and has shipbreakers and bankers alike talking about the future for the economy in Western India. During our trip, we visited the local branch of the State Bank of India in Bhavnagar, where we were told of the importance of getting additional Navy ships in the future.
Obviously, because see, this is the only industry which doesn't need power, which doesn't need sweet water. It doesn't need any other sophisticated capital investment. With crude method, they have been converting ship into metal, which is being recycled.
We heard similar observations from the head of the Shipbreakers Union in Along, Vishnu Gupta. Although Gupta was more careful with his endorsement of the Bennington project, he admitted that the ship could mean some 2,000 jobs in salvaging the metal in the months to come. He said the big challenge will be in getting the Bennington's hull ashore because of its steep draft.
Aircraft carrier is first vessel for Along. This draft is too high. And maybe so many problems for cutting this aircraft carrier.
Impact right down to the pictures in the bank offices. And for companies like RRI and Cross Seas, which brought the ship to India, there's hope that this arrival won't be the last.
It was worth it, yeah, and like it has carried a big name for RRI, for Cross Seas, for us, like because it was the first ever aircraft carrier in the history to come into Along in India, and everybody is, I believe, proud of it. We are RRI and everybody, yeah.